Merkabra.
No, like I said, I'd seen the first 60 plus or so of Grand Theft World, so I was acquainted with you through that forum and also got to meet LD as well recently. Cool guy. So it's nice in the general nexus of conversation, we're all sort of orbiting one another.
That's right. So tell me how you woke up, or were you always awake, or is that something you wouldn't even describe yourself as going through, or what was the process like, if so?
Uh, okay. Well, I mean, I guess I always hated school, so it wasn't that I was awake so much as I just realized that that was a prison that was designed to kind of like slowly crush your soul and take away your ability to be creative and do a lot of other important things as well. So school was the enemy. I didn't really understand why it was the enemy. I figured that out later. Compulsory school system being designed to crush us and do all of the things that I just mentioned that I understood intuitively. So that dynamic of being awake was always there, but it wasn't really formalized in like a deeper understanding of how the world works until I saw Zeitgeist, and then Zeitgeist led to a deeper pursuit of 9/11 truth, and then that subsequently became a lifelong endeavor, and it's ongoing trying to figure out just how vast and expansive the convoluted mess we're in is. Do you hear that circular saw? Could you hear that?
I don't hear it, but
Oh, really? Wow. Okay. On my end, it's so bad, but okay. Good to know that that's not picking up for you. Yeah.
yeah, we can touch up the audio, or it's nice to have little fragments in the background. That way we know you're real. This isn't an AI generated video.
Okay. Well, all right. Sure. Well, hopefully it doesn't pick up on your end because it's like there's a horror movie going on in
I
my
can touch up the
basement.
audio a little bit. I do that with the background humming of the computers anyway, so yeah, so Zeitgeist, that seemed to be one of the movies that floated around at that time. Peter, I almost wanted to say, yeah, I can't remember his last name,
Joseph?
but
Peter Gabriel. I think it's Peter Gabriel. Maybe. Yeah, I think so.
yeah,
Peter
and
Joseph Gabriel, one of them.
yeah, maybe Peter Joseph. Yeah, we'll see. Uh,
They both sound like musicians. That's the problem.
yeah, Peter Joseph, I think it is, but the movie itself had a lot of good information, and then when you go back and watch it again, you see all the little things that are kind of like, oh yeah, that's not something. But yeah, a lot of the information on the Federal Reserve was maybe not as accurate as at the time. Like everybody thought, like, oh my god, this is the way that it is. With a lot of the things in that documentary are like that, but at the same time, it was a zeitgeist. It like went around 2012 ish, I would say. I came across it. Maybe. So, what time frame was that for you when you were going through that?
Probably like 2008, 2007. So it had been around for a year or two. I don't know recall exactly when it came out. But it was formative in the perspective of I would go out and try and have conversations about this with people, and they wouldn't be able to have conversations about it. They'd always out like say, "Oh, I don't believe it," or "It's not possible," or they'd be like, "Well, that doesn't make sense because." And it's the one where it's like that doesn't make sense because I'd be like, "Okay, well, I don't understand that either." So I'd have to go and research it over and over again. And so it's one of those conversation starters that eventually results in many a library or a podcast kind of like uh, I don't know what you would call a library of podcasts. Is there a word for that? Whatever that is.
An archive?
Sure. I don't know if it's the same thing. Flipping through all of us who just listen to podcasts all the time. Is that like, yeah, okay. We'll go personality archive, something like that. Yeah.
So, and I've been catching up on your work and listening to interviews that you've done, and you've heard you mention a little bit. You can correct me here if I'm wrong, and protect me, but correct me if I'm wrong. But you mentioned, growing up and your childhood, or your parents were mother a PhD, as I have it, and father a neuroscientist,
He's a neuropsychologist, so they're all psychologists.
neuropsychologist.
That's the thing that they have in relation. Yeah.
So for your like formative years, or also your awakening, And like I know you've done some work with your mom that seems to be more in the light of her supporting a lot of your worldviews. I'm putting things in there that I don't know. That's why I'd like asking the question, like, how did their backgrounds affect your growing up? And was it sort of them helping you along the path, or in a lot of people's cases, like they're sort of all alone when they're going through the, quote unquote, waking up process?
Okay, so there's a lot of answers to a variety of questions, and I'll try and touch on them all. So basically, um, I inherited the conversation from both of them in the sense of them being academics and well explored in research and teaching and all of the things that go with it. And so I was always in kind of like a rich forum of conversation that was accessible to me throughout my life because of that. That was one thing that was always there. And then that sort of rubbed off on me through just the opportunity to be around other people of that caliber through my extended family and whatnot. But at the same time, it was kind of like an emotionally destabilized, like divorce family, going into all kinds of different uh, things that I don't need to mention, but you get the idea of tumultuous times at the same. And that's one of those things where like it created the outlets of creativity for myself as well as exploring video games, which touches on what my mother does because she's video game and dream researcher. Prior to entering into the video game research, she was doing the dream research, and that was touching on the lucidity and the idea of the academic community seeing lucid dreams as viable and real. Because prior to that point, they weren't formally really accepted or understood in that um, let's just say staunch and traditional environment. You know, they're always tightly puckered when it comes to venturing into new paradigms, and she was trying to get them to unpucker on that one. So she was summoned by the Dalai Lama, went through the formal machinations of best-selling blah blah blah, eventually went the research route, and that overlapped with having a son who was me, going about the process of surviving the divorce. And the way in which she bribed me in order to do that amicably was to give me a video game console because my dad didn't want to give me one. And on the way back from like the toy store getting the thing, I had my head in the box kissing it. And she's looking at me like, okay, well, I better look at the research to understand what this thing's going to do to my kid. And she found that the research for lucid dreaming and video game play overlapped significantly. And if you think about it, it's kind of like an intermediary apparatus between us and what's on the screen, whereby if you're just watching something, you're a passive recipient. This one, you're an active participant. And that's something that changes the way in which it ultimately factors into our dreams. So video games are changing consciousness. And that's something that we co-authored a book on that touches on the conversation that she's lent me my entire life. And then my dad structures into that in a different way with his psychology research and all of his beliefs. And yeah, so it's kind of just like this large bubble of conversation then that has been burgeoning since I was a kid. And that originally started with writing, but eventually it ended up in more of the research end and then tying the two together.
Nice. Yeah, I will talk about that book a little bit later. I have some pre-canned questions about that. But getting into a sort of a different vein, kind of back to where we left off with going through the waking up process, I'd like to get your take on the landscape of what people may call, or what we may even consider ourselves a part of, the truth and freedom movement in general. And do you label yourself as like someone in the truth and freedom community? Um, I'm a little bit more, uh, I am a little bit more judgmental, I guess you could say, of the truth and freedom community in general. But what is your take on the
Uh,
landscape or where we're at with the truth and freedom movement?
Okay, well, if that's a thing, and if it's actually a truth and freedom movement, then it's just like a handful of people in a variety of different capacities that are actually making any real prominent moves conducive to a broader worldview shift necessary as a prerequisite to getting everyone to change their actual actions and directions in life. So there's like this prerequisite understanding and then the formal pivot of synergistic cooperation that follows thereafter. So to a certain extent, you're not really going to be able to get a large number of the population in order to be able to understand this stuff. You're supposed to lead by example, and then it changes in kind of a domino falling, just in the way in which that should I just say it on a metaphysical way, so I don't have to go into a long explanation. But the idea being that very few people are actually doing it right. A huge number of people are in the way. It's not really going anywhere. And until the people lead by example, that's not going to change. And when it does, hopefully it'll change relatively quickly. That's kind of like my optimistic perspective on where it can go. Where it's at, most people just have their heads up their ass. And they aren't doing like the really necessary um, insert solution to problem here. They're not doing that. And in order to be able to get to where we need to get, which is very far from where we are. And that's just the reality. So yeah, we're probably, I don't know if you're harsher than that. I understand it, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with the whole thing.
Well, do you mean like people in general aren't doing what you would consider like the right thing in order to make a shift, or like are you saying people in the truth and freedom community themselves are focusing on the wrong things?
I'm saying like both, and it's a spectrum of problems, and they compound one another. And like really just it's a worldview conundrum. People don't understand basic dynamics of morality on a metaphysical level that then factors into the way in which we structure our understanding, which is a combination both of material and spiritual. And on the point of esotericism and occultism, it's diverging from just mysticism, which is more belief based, and turning it into something that's actually something that can be understood. And once it's understood, it's explored in a responsible manner, conducive to the betterment of all who are going about that exploration. That's what we're trying to do from an initiatic perspective of the unveiling of a more responsible stewardship of the species at large. So it's kind of just like this, here's what you do to be able to get that done. And by and large, people in the general population aren't doing it because they're not incentivized or rewarded for it. They're largely unaware of what the great work is. And then on the other perspective, it's like, the people in the truth movement aren't necessarily looking at it from that point of view because they aren't thinking of it of trying to get a job done within humanity. They're just thinking of it as copy and pasting the narrative structure of conventional media. Because if you go about copy and pasting the conventional structure of narrative media, then it's like you're handing people the thing that you were handed. They're basically just torchbearers that are lighting themselves and each other up. So it doesn't amount to anything. And a consequence that we're able to once again steward between one another conducive to getting the job done. So it's what we are as a clusterfuck like shit show of people creating a larger pyre so they can set themselves on fire for retweets and likes on Twitter, and that's the environment.
Can you give an example of that, like where you see people maybe sharing information that you see as that repetitive sort of cybernetic loop of the truth and freedom community's own bullshit that may or not be true, but is shared in that way?
Like the entirety of the Libertarian Party as an example of something that still exists within the statist paradigm, which is a violation, which is slavery, and by way of that is something that will inevitably percolate proportionate to our allowance of it democide. So the more in which this shit exists, the more in which it eventually results in mass murder, and that's just how that works. It's an inevitability. So until we up our game and our level of just like getting it and change that, it's going to keep happening, and that's kind of what I'm alluding to as like the stagnant margins by which people attempt to improve, but they're really just like edging out the fence of that slaughterhouse. You know, it's like, oh, we'll build it further. It's like, guys, you're not getting anywhere. We need to exit the slaughterhouse dynamic that we exist in.
Yeah, those are good examples. I observe that those things as well. I think we're in a problematic time with so much information sharing, and it's hard to decipher like what's important, especially as you might be going through a transition in your life to a new thought process or discovering things that you thought were wrong and looking for new information. The deluge of information that's available is problematic. You know, video games are great, but they can add to that problem as well when we're consuming too much and not, using it as a tool to even expand our consciousness, as you got into in the book, or maybe you alluded to that a minute ago, but definitely I think mentioned it in the book. But then you have, and also for spreading good messages. Obviously, the technology, we can use it for that, and it can be spread in video games, even, let's say. And as everything starts to sort of converge, we can use all these tools for good. We can use Twitch instead of just streaming for games. It can also be used for streaming truth, freedom information, right? So that's an interesting take. Yeah, the Libertarian political party is sort of a joke in general as a concept. Just the
Yeah,
framing of that phrase that I just said is a contradiction in itself. Political movements that are for true freedom. But when did you first come across Richard Grove's work?
I met Richard Grove through originally I was on Corbett Report like 13 some years ago, maybe 14, I don't know. But that was for a short film I made called Blindfold. It's available for watch on Teace.ca. You can go there and check it out right now if you just want to get a sense of what that was and then jump back into the interview. But as a short blip, it was a narrative fiction that touched on the 9/11 truth movement. And it's about a widower daughter and, or sorry, a widower father and his preteen daughter as they try and reconcile their kind of like, let's say, oh yeah, it's on screen there, tumultuous kind of transition into the 9/11 truth movement, because she gave a presentation to her class talking about the Twin Towers being brought down because of controlled demolition. And it created this whole fuss with the teacher because it was in New York. And that's how her mother died. So anyway, that's a short film that was well received by Corbett and through that Richard Grove. And one day I saw the views on it just go up by a hundred or so. And that was odd. So I listened to what it was linked to, and it was a podcast that Richard had done, and I'd never heard of his work before. So I just emailed him. I'm like, hey, do you want me to write for you to get a sense of like working together to create the thing that you were talking about on the podcast? And he's like, yeah, I like the way you think. So we corresponded for a while to basically brainstorm, and I was like writing the show. But at the same time, I was doing my first feature film, Hold Me, which is also available on that website. And he was doing State of Mind, the documentary. And the State of Mind documentary, like it's great. It worked out awesome. And Hold Me, I completed a few years later. And so it was one of those things where we didn't end up making the show that we were originally corresponding about. But here we are all these years later, and I occasionally go on Grand Theft World in order to premiere the new mini docs of Conspiracy Synergy. So it went from meeting a long time ago to occasionally bumping shoulders here today.
Yeah, that's so an interesting loop there is like Corbett, obviously Richard's well known, but when he started the Grand Theft World, I was around at that time helping with the production side, and hadn't really taken off yet. We definitely had the core audience that are interested in what Richard's doing and watching their emails. Oh, hey, look, he's got a new podcast going. But as far as like the traction that it has now, kind of wasn't there in the beginning, but the spike happened when Corbett came on or featured Richard's Grand Theft World in like a new article or a new post he did. I can't remember. But we the same thing. Like we're like, what's going on? Like everything was just going straight up. Or like then the server crashed. I think it took down the website, or it's causing it to have issues. But so Corbett, for those who don't know his work, should definitely go check out thecorbettreport.com. I've featured his work several times in podcasts that I've done. I think James does great work. So that's cool that he picked up your work. And then Richard as well. So if I go back and listen to like the Peace Revolution or something, I wonder if it was mentioned in an episode that I just missed at that time because there's so much information there. But
No, I think it was him on some podcast with some other guy. I don't recall exactly. It was one where he was the guest on someone else's. I don't know if it ever got mentioned in Peace Revolution.
so yeah, when did you start putting your work up online? Or like from the beginning, was it just that's where the work went, or did you have your work put together and then decided to put it on Teace.ca, or how did you start accumulating your body of work online like it is now?
Sure, yeah. Oh man, I consider myself really lucky that I didn't grow up in a generation where the internet was available very young, because I went through the process of starting my first book when I was 10 years old. Prior to that, I'd written a screenplay. I used to do like uh, rehearse plays in class and all kinds of things that would have been embarrassing as hell if I'd actually tried to jump into the creative space early on. And so I attempted that in, say, 18, 19 years old. But my first things went up, but they ended up being taken down because they weren't good enough. I've written 10 books and 5 of them will never see the light of day. And that's like my first like to another couple and blah blah whatever. It happens. You got to get through the motions of creating things that aren't great in pursuit of trying to actually be great someday. And it's never ending pursuit. So that's kind of just something that I've always done, is to explore the work, and using creativity as, I would say, the main outlet to do it, because creativity is something that, especially when it comes to conversations about conspiracy, I think it allows you to approach things and controversy in a way that people would normally be very defensive to. But if you put it in a creative lens, then they can become very receptive. And so it's always been trying to use that, not manipulation tactic. It's more just like a way of viewing truth. I want to think of it that way, and that's what I try and do anyway.
Yeah, your work. At first, I think even myself, I was like, "What was this guy doing?" Like, with because I came across conspiracy synergy, and it didn't take long, obviously, to catch on to your style out there and what your approach was. And now I've listened to some interviews where you've talked about, the style and how you've attempted to approach the message transfer there, basically, like getting that information out in a totally unique way that's totally not conventional to what other people are doing, and very well done. So definitely people need to go check out Conspiracy Synergy, and we'll put those links in the show notes for sure. So I appreciate you for putting that work up there and taking the time. But yeah, your other works, I love your what you said there about putting work out, and it's not always going to be the best, but you just move on or something like that, something along those lines. I admire that and aspire to be more creative myself and put out more work, and I feel like I have a really hard time doing that. So I like hearing someone else's perspective on, like, yeah, but it's not always going to be perfect, so don't let the perfect be the enemy of the done, is one of my favorites as of late. Is like, perfectionism is oftentimes just procrastination masked in trying to wait for the right timing, or wait for the right, make sure something's perfectly understood, or that you've got it fully figured out before starting this series here was sort of a leap of faith in that way. Is like, I wanted to start interviewing people, but I didn't exactly have it encapsulated on how I wanted it to look. And then it sort of came to me, and I wasn't sure. I was like, I guess that's what we're going to do, is move forward with that idea. And even myself at the time wasn't too sure about it, but eventually you have to like execute and start putting out work. I wouldn't say just jump into it right away and just start doing things, right? Like, without even like putting much forethought into it. But yeah, I think a lot of people do have a hard time like getting off the plate, like getting off to first base. Like well, sorry, a baseball reference for someone from Canada. I'm just kidding. You're totally lost. I'm sorry.
We have baseball here too.
All right. Now, tell me about, speaking of conspiracy synergy, I want you to take as much time as you need here. And without giving away the secret sauce, so people can still go get the full message from the series, well, tell me about your plan to save the world.
Yeah, so that's a particular video sequence that's a couple hours long, of like 20 or so different alternative media content creators coming together and just throwing some ideas out there about things that we can all do in order to be able to save the world, as it were. It's also just like kind of a conceptual idea inside of the video game, the plan to save the world, that's happening inside of the series Conspiracy Synergy, which is kind of just like a fun, playful rabbit puppet jaunt of getting everyone off their butt and trying it to share it with their friends and family, because you could literally binge watch it and get people up to speed pretty quickly, and that's important in an information worldview, full spectrum dominance, kind of all the marbles day and age that we live in. That's actually pretty important. So check out conspiracysynergy.com and share it with your friends and family. If you haven't done that already, hey, it might actually be the tipping in a long war of attrition, because yeah, we're not getting out of this one, so we got to solve the problem, or we're fucked. Like, that's kind of where we're at. So conspiracy synergy is designed to hopefully attempt to accomplish that, and it's it's a lot of different things all in one. It's supposed to be entertaining, but it's really also curriculum, and it's a worldview refresher for a lot of people who didn't understand the problem that we're in, so that they can actually change things. And the idea, once again, being save the world as kind of just a metaphor for changing yourself, and through that what you do with others, and through that how we all go about conducting ourselves in a civilized society, and what we do or do not exist in as far as the continuance of government, and ultimately transitioning that hopefully to a point wherein we're simply so wise that we recognize we no longer need it. And that's kind of just, you shrug it off, you eviscerate the pre-existing system. So saving the world is just changing the paradigm that we live in.
Yeah. When did you start doing that series?
I started it just prior to the whole lockdown fake pandemic bullshit. So for me, it was in the months, and this is typically how I work creatively. I'll be doing things that build in a way so that I get taken for a loop by life, and then it's like, do this thing creatively. I'm like, fine, and then I do it, and then it does it to me again, and that's my entire life. So creative sequence of being held hostage by life and forcing me to be creative, and that was one of those things. So it ended up being more relevant post lockdowns and everything. And I'm sitting around just like reading and studying and trying to get a grasp on what I was going to put out. And it was originally going to be a much more long and drawn out thing. And then I realized all this other shit was happening. So I'm like, I kind of just feeling the crush of it and having to shoot it out as quickly as I could, while still having the real full depths of information available for people, so that it didn't feel like they were being shortchanged on their end. And that was a difficult balance that I've been doing for the last 5 years straight. But yeah, it's one of those things where even prior to that, the research end was years and years and years and years and years. So even before starting, it was a long time going.
Right. So would you say that the pandemic, and you said you started before, so the pandemic didn't really get you moving on that. You were already in motion and sort of right on time.
Yeah. That's typically how my creatively works. It's like nonlinear time perception, and I'm off by a few years, but I'm always in that kind of margin of. And if you look at my catalog of stuff and what they thematically touch on, it's like all very relevant. And like a zombie book where I have the pandemic happening 2 years earlier in that, and I have like this like convoy of it's a head nod to what happened in Canada. But anyway, it's like multiple overlaps that kind of emerge in a synchromistic dynamic that cross pollinates between you, the creator, and the things that you create. And ultimately, it's kind of just like viewing time in a nonlinear way. And I describe it as you're kind of approximately close in the thing that's relevant, but you never really completely understand it. So it's more just like surfing the waves of intuition.
Yeah, incredible timing. I think at the time we were in the middle of Grand Theft World, or but the beginnings of it, and that the first Conspiracy Synergy video came out with the expose, Richard and Mark, and I recall showing it to Mark in a meeting, and he was like, "We need to get this guy on One Great Work Network. I'd like to get him on right away." So yeah, again, just funny how things come together like that, and I'm glad to see that you're up there on the One Great Work Network. So far, the people that I've interviewed in this series have all been on there. Maybe not so much by chance, but we are going to go out. My next person lined up is not in the One Great Work Network, though. Maybe some of these people that I go out and find, we can onboard if they're interested. I mean, I know they're working on onboarding more people over there on the One Great Work Network. So another project that, though you and I have never met, we work together on because we post our content over there. And so there's a lot of crossover, which is why I reached out to you. It made a lot of sense to reach out, get to know you, touch on your work, because I think you've done a tremendous job with the Conspiracy Synergy work that you've done, but then also on the AM Wake Up, and again catching up on your work, just your parrhesia and ability to speak freely and speak against authority, and also express your opinions, which I know for me, it's like putting yourself out there like that. Maybe for some people it's just more straightforward in who they are. For me, it's a little bit of a challenge, and I think I do hesitate sometimes to say it so freely as I've witnessed you have the ability to do, and I really appreciate that about you.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the feedback. It's good to get that support from listeners and fellow participants as we go about the actual info war, not in reference to the website or any host. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
What was COVID all about, in your opinion? I mean, you called it the pandemic. What was it? What was that? What do you think that was all about?
Yeah. So it's a term borrowed from Catherine Austin Fitts is where I first heard it. I don't know if she got it from somewhere, but it's stacking functions. And stacking functions, you can think of it like a Jenga cube. Jenga cube being how many condensed kind of ideas or segments can you in a compartmentalized way lock into the artillery shell of the psyop that you're going to hit humanity with, which is kind of what that was. It was a shotgun blast to the back of the head repeatedly for a few years on end in order to be able to bring about a multitude of different things. And so from the onset, it's important to understand it's a variety of different things that go into a variety of different paradigms that stem from kind of a singular transition point in the timeline or the species development, however the fuck you want to think of it. Insert verbiage here, like take those words of whatever viewpoint you view our world through. And it was about trying to get people into a meat grinder. And that meat grinder is the technocratic era. And Passio uses the terminology of a technocratic occultocracy, which I would agree with, basically, a technocratic occultocracy. And I've described that in its functional kind of like way in which we view it or we would understand it. And I go from like surface level to underground, but surface level, it's like governments and corporations. Under that, it's like secret societies and the ideologies. And at a certain point, it becomes what's objectively true in nature. So, in a metaphysical way, via the occultocracy that utilizes technocracy to then perform its rituals via us through our thoughts, feelings, and actions, because we are the ritualistic participants in the culmination of that process, which sort of percolates in the cauldron that is the metaphysical soup between us. That's what this is. They're cooking with the species. They're trying to create something out of all of it. So the various different paradigm and dynamics which were brought into the multifaceted psyop of brainwashing, of trauma bonding, of injecting people through something that if you look at it in the smallest level isn't the same in any vial. So we're looking at broad human experimentation campaigns. Broad human experimentation campaigns overlap with the electrosmog that we exist in. You can look at the one-to-one between where the highest incidence of what was deemed contagion were breaking out, and then it was, oh, by the way, equally 5G and equally susceptible to susceptibility, because you can think of placebo and nocebo and the psychosomatic degree to which they were basically just conflating influenza with what was happening according to them being a virus. But that's not really the case. It's more complicated than that. The way in which we think of all of these different things is actually kind of just a multitude of intersections between currently siloed and compartmentalized ideas. And once you remove those compartmentalizations, it becomes something that's more of a fluid interchange of the idea that disease isn't caused by one thing. So disease isn't caused by one thing. It's caused by pressure points on a variety of different things, giving way to the emergence of symptoms. Then the for-profit industry clamps down on those symptoms, tell that you have diseases, need more pills for it. It eventually creates more diseases, and then that accelerates over time as we're simultaneously watching our children be poisoned. So it's a kind of like this broad infrastructure culling of the population in a gaslit democide where the gas chamber is just open air, a prison that we're all walking around it. And then you can look at the tip of the spear of the methodology by which that's being done as Gaza, but then there's also the different trial balloon mechanisms by which it's being done to all of us. And that's kind of just what the third world is. It's a very different paradigm that we exist in, the meat grinder that we were shoved in order to cook with us and then create through the things that we do a different kind of being. And that involves you and me. It's all of us. It's what it is to be a different kind of human being. That's the technocratic era. And we're just like teeing off.
So would you say there's a technocratic, or I call it a techno-communist regime? I think you said that occultocracy, technocratic occultocracy.
Yeah.
I think people can break down what that would etymologically break down as. But so would you say there's a technocratic control regime attempting to control the world or in control of the world currently?
I'd say that that's the kind of like the tool that they're doing it through. These are forces in nature that work their way through people and also just like all different echelons of consciousness in an upward trajectory of understanding beyond what at a certain point is even capable for words to describe. You know, it's like you can point to Vedic systems like theosophy, blah, 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 all these different esoteric metrics of giving a scaffolding for what the 10 layers of say spiritual hierarchies or angels and versus like the other side of it being a hell realm dynamic and arguing that that's what this very existence is. Some people get into simulation theory, other people get into different perceptual lenses to go about describing the war of good and evil that we're in. But it really is basically fundamentally sort of a war of good and evil, and then it exists in a hierarchical scaffolding of attempting to ascend or be pulled into the nether end, that kind of thing.
So when you formulated your overview there of COVID, there was a lot to it. I think understanding cybernetics would be helpful at that point if someone hasn't thought of the concept or doesn't know about cybernetics, kybernetes, and how you've linked that in, I think, through the esotericism, through the hypercube, and the thought pattern of also like what you just, the overview you just laid down. I'm trying to pick up on it as part of a technocratic control grid using cybernetic loops as a form of the hypercube. And I'd like you to kind of take off from there. If I'm linking together the proper things for that overall view of what COVID is. I mean, someone comes across what you just said and they're thinking, I thought it was a legitimate pandemic. Like, help those people bridge the gap to what you were
Okay.
saying,
Yeah, sure. So you were lied to about literally everything about the pandemic, all of it. It was all basically a lie. And even the stuff that was true is like sandwiched between so many lies that it's like, oh man, why am I even clinging to this truth anymore? So it's that bad. It's like it was that brutal how bad we were all lied to about everything. Once you understand that it was actually done for like stuff, that was the sleight of hand to get you to do it. It's like, oh, look at here, this, that, it's going on. And then behind the scenes, all this other crazy crap is going on. The more in which you explore that crazy crap, it's actually what's percolating up from behind like a very deep and old culture that's like very kind of like willing to treat people like cattle in order to get what they want out of them. And then the way in which they will structurally engineer the thought patterns that they can apply to the species in order to get us to successfully go into boxcars is called cybernetics. And that's the kind of like social leveraging of each other in order to get a particular kind of behavior. And that's what's been happening for a long time via social engineers and the eugenics that bring that into being. And what's happening right now is the fusion of what they've been bringing into being, kind of like the Westminster dog show, generations of dogs that they get to interbreed until they're a particular kind of weird. That's where we're at. And they've been preparing us to interface with the machine, basically. So they want us to enter into kind of like a dependency model where we exist within what can be viewed as the hypercube. For those who don't know the hypercube, I think I suck at the pronunciation, Tesseract, it's something like that. But it's basically the idea of the dark Luciferians use that symbolism to convey never escaping the materialist mold, the constant perpetual cycle of existing within the framework of the lower astral or the hell realm, or that which, if we do not act responsibly, will remain that way and ultimately get worse. So in order to get out of this motherfucker, in order to be able to make things better, we're supposed to be working together to save the world. Like short version of everything that I was touching on, but that's the meaning of the story and what we're all supposed to be doing together.
What happens if we don't?
Everything gets worse and worse and worse and worse until eventually it reaches like species level cataclysm shit, which might just be hard baked in anyway. But you can think of like situational awareness, moving yourself where things are going to be better, detection methods, like who you do or do not work with, what your skill sets are, et cetera, and so forth. So there's still a lot you can do with that. Arguably cataclysms may be 2040, 2046. Don't know. We'll see how this shit works out for everybody. Point is, prepare for if things get real, but also if you can stay plugged in, and we're going to try and make it so that it doesn't suck as bad for the next generation, because holy fuck, are they like downwind from some pretty toxic fumes, and we got to stop putting those fumes off. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, as people navigate what has come to be known as the alternative media landscape, uh, something you're very familiar with, you're helping create it yourself. Maybe you don't label yourself as an alternative media analyst or something, or that's not a label that you like to wear. I personally really try to stay away from most labels, so don't mean to just say that you're part of the alternative media, but maybe at the Union of the Unwanted show is a great example of a bunch of people that are in the alternative media who've been decided that they've been declared unmutual, right? A prisoner from the prisoner Patrick McGowan term, and society doesn't want to hear from these people. Um, I think that's a great group of people. I don't want to say like everybody's perfect or something like that. I don't know if there's in that group even what you've deemed as controlled opportunists, which is
That's
a
Steve's term. Steve's term.
okay, Steve's term. You guys have
Yeah.
talked about it. What does it mean? I mean, first of all, like, what is it coming from that you're spinning off this phrase that you've created? You and Steve, or Steve, sorry.
No, that's Steve's term,
Yes.
controlled opportunist, and it's describing a particular dynamic that's come to emerge as a result of the echo chamber social media, quote unquote, alternative media, which it may or may not be, because it's so controlled or controlled opportunist that it keeps people in those echo chamber environments that are created for people to pump themselves up in. It's people want to rule tiny boxes, and tiny boxes are a lot easier to rule and to make money off of. Something like this, where it's a higher level of um, let's say coordination to change things, not just to parrot them the way that they are, aren't actually going to get funded as much because people will do that for like a reality TV show that they participate in, but they won't necessarily do it in the formative dynamic by which they go about co-creating change. And so it's one of those things where we're almost like tortoise and the hare. I know that I use the rabbit as the metaphor, but it's like the truth movement is kind of like this long form emergence of a different way of thinking, and that ties in significantly prior to ourselves. That's agorism, the idea of decommissioning and destructuring the pre-existing system, and through kind of like think of it as a freedom cell network mantra a la Derek Bros, as an extension of that in the contemporary, picking up those different kind of like, let's say, uh, group dynamics that then build something formidable, and doing that in the midst of everything going awry until we, the few, have actually been able to, I would hope, culture something that the next generation can pick up and run with, because we're at a point where we have like the film language and everything else built in a way that our job ultimately, like you mentioned the Union of the Unwanted, and it's a great conversational forum. I think the job isn't really going to get done in that cultural forum. I think that it needs to move to a point of co-creative action in a cross-pollination of conversation between different communities who recognize other communities as having the wherewithal in order to be able to enter that level of functional skill sets, resilience, and everything that goes with it. And I think that that's not a secret society dynamic. I think it's just a building off of the grammar and then making that accessible to people wherever they are. And that's really the mission right now. It's like you understand that, and then you make it accessible, and then you incentivize everyone getting up on doing it. And if we don't, then game over, man.
Yeah, I think there are good examples out there even now of like what you could actually do in the real world to begin the process of impacting things on a real level. And I think that's a beautiful vision, taking communities that are having effective measures and mimicking that. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel. I think that there's a lot of problematic things too, right? Oh, over here we found the solution is to file this particular piece of paperwork, and there's obviously so many problems with that. I mean, I'm not trying to like naysay, but people should be careful to just jump on every example of what people are out there doing before vetting it out. I have even close acquaintances that I would, if I, could get out in front of them with the right information before they had already taken the actions they've taken. But at this point, it's like, they've already gone down a road that I've confirmed as being completely not the right way to go. So, but over time, maybe I, could put out better work. So if I take responsibility for that situation, maybe I could have shared something with them that would have helped them, or not even my own work, to not go what I call falling into the movement traps. And it's sort of a larger category of me helping people navigate that realm and not go down the wrong path. But back to controlled opportunists, the controlled opposition, is that kind of where that term is coming from? Like controlled opposition. Oh, well, this is how it works. They're paid and they say all these things. Controlled opportunists being, well, they're not necessarily paid by the government, but they're fitting into that niche
Yep.
knowingly, unknowingly, sort of feeling that the pressure is less over here. If I go here, I get rewarded. And so if I say these things, then so it's a feedback loop of sort of the hopium and other things that people have. So you would say like Jones is either knowingly or unknowingly in this category.
I'd say Jones knowingly is from a long time ago, but I think that it's different levels of knowing for someone who, like, if you look at Bill Cooper freaking out about what like a scumbag he thought he was, you can look at the argument of him being situated in order to be able to have the Bohemian Grove stuff, the degree to which he's just been there to inflame the cultural temperament surrounding a nuanced capillary conversation of conspiracy and making it just about like pumping veins at the neck rather than actually getting to the throat of this vampiric class that has been slowly siphoning from all of us. And that's just the environment that we've existed in, to a point wherein we're so emotionally inflamed and are kind of like nerves are worn thin, that in that environment a gust of wind feels like it's a razor blade. And so to have caricatures like that overtaking the conversation for everyone who steps up to bat is the thing that has sabotaged us over and over again for a very long time. So you can think of the culturally curated dynamic by which we go about communicating as another layer of this as well, because controlled opportunists aren't just necessarily the people who are out there throwing out information. They're also the way in which they're throwing out sentiment along with that information, such that it adds sediment to information and makes it so that we're all full of a bunch of shit, even if it's just the way we're talking about it. So it's a multitude of different kind of character dynamics that unfold from that simple concept and what it is in the real world, and how it's more prominent in social media than we might like to think.
Yeah, I tend to think that Jones is controlled opposition as well, and that he's more doing like a predictive programming and limited hangout release of information, because it's like the setting the fire that's smaller than the wildfire, forget what we call it, the perimeter fire or whatever, right? That it sucks out the oxygen from what's coming. So there's this massive storm of, you could say, consciousness rising on the way. And so you capture it and trickle it into the direction that you'd like to see it go. And that way you're still basically in control of the movement and overall general consciousness of people, but giving them full belief that they're like on the right trail, right? And then so that almost becomes worse than fully asleep people, because you've got like fully committed, confused people in a way.
Yeah, but I mean, I think a lot of this fundamentally comes down to the dynamic I was alluding to earlier, which is that very few people understand what the great work is. And then very few people, because we understand it, very few people do it. And then because very few people do it, it doesn't get out there and like proliferate. It doesn't really spread in a way in which it brings about an exponential increase in people's just changing their lives to ultimately become right livelihood. Right livelihood basically being like, is what you're doing moral? One, does it align with that in the way in which you interface in a largely immoral world? Two, and if not, how can you gradually diminish the degree to which you pay into these systems, take out of these systems, and eventually transition that to creative solutions? And that isn't just like an alternative media thing. That's like the way in which it's talked about. Really, it's literally just being a good person, and it's doing it for the right reasons, and it's doing that in a creative way that it applies every single day, even if it's just doing a good job at whatever the hell job it is you got at the time. And that's a big thing, because every day you're going to be building off of those tiny incremental steps, which are the refinements of habits. And so the refinement of habits that we are doing is congruent to a better formation of people on a level of the gathering of information and then the application of those skill sets. And so I just continue to come back to, we're supposed to be doing the change, not just be the change that you want to see in the world. No, it's like inspire the change that you want to see in the world. And you inspire the change that you want to see in the world by making tools accessible enough to the average individual so that they don't have to go the hard road of understanding everything that we have, simply because that's something that you need to create those systems first. And then other people will eventually step into that understanding later. I don't like that it's like that, but taking the time to fully like educate them doesn't seem to be like really completely accessible at this particular interval, given that we're in the next 4 to 5 years of like the clamp down from like this technocratic thing. So it's one of those things where it's like different formations are eventually going to rear their head. Some of us are in the process of creating the media that helps wake other people up. Some people are in the process of simply disseminating that in order to be able to get them to a situational understanding. But wherever it is you're at in your personal progression of any of that, it really is at a certain level just a one mission dynamic. And it's a one mission dynamic not because of our opinion on anything. It's a byproduct of a metaphysical buildup. If you get a metaphysical buildup of existing in basically a perpetual slave state, the inverse of the way it's supposed to be, then that emerges through all of our coalescent reality as some shit that you can easily conceptually think of as either a war or an asteroid or something like that. So it's like it really is one mission once you understand that you got to get everyone to basically just understand some basic shit, live morally, change the systems. If you're at a point where you're just a fucking janitor, fine. Just be a nice janitor who does a good job and stop sucking the dick of government. That's it. It's like it's really that fucking simple. There isn't some gigantic fucking ass war you need to win. There isn't some stupid like crazy backflip like jump into an Iron Man suit that we have to do in order to be able to unlock the keys to eternity. Understand basic shit, stop being immoral, get other people to do the same, work your ass off, and then make it so that your kids don't inject themselves with experimental injection campaigns. It's pretty fucking simple here, people. But apparently we can't really prioritize that because some new shit comes out every week and it's very entertaining and distracting. So yeah, the situation stays the same. You're muted.
I think about it quite a bit, and the numbers game versus like effective individuals. I think the answer is kind of obvious that it's not just one or the other. You've covered in your work these mini docs that you're doing where you're highlighting individuals that are, making a big difference, and they're simply individuals, and I think you've said something along those lines as well, right? That these one, like Derek Bros, for example, is one person who's doing all these different things, and he's not like a Superman superhero person, right? He's just focusing and controlling his focus to focus on the things that he feels like are the most important things to focus on, not getting distracted, like you said, by the next big thing that comes along. In his work, he's also a journalist as well, so he's also covering a lot of the dynamics of current affairs, but it's always sort of based in this general movement towards something, towards more freedom for everyone, right? The Conscious Resistance Network. So do you think like it is a numbers game? And if so, in my opinion, that means we're kind of screwed right now, at least. Or is it a ripple effect? Ricky Varandas, is the ripple effect real? Can we cause change, on a big level by just having the right individual step up to the plate? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's a huge question that I guess I'll try and keep it simple because otherwise I'll end up talking about 20 different ideas that factor into it. But basically, we're supposed to co-create the better future that we want to live in together. And in order to do that, each of us is kind of like a key to a larger puzzle. And we've been handed a particular conundrum that has been building for a long time. That is an objective reality situation that is possible to understand and help disseminate the understanding of. So it's one of those things where, yeah, I mean, you're supposed to be creative enough to come up with a fucking solution, no matter how screwed the problem is. That's as simple as I can say it. And I think that as a numbers game, like the idea that if you get 51% of the population understanding the difference in like something, that it will change that in a significant paradigm shifting or phase shift, if you want to take like Dr. Shiva's verbiage for it. And once you reach that phase shifting human consciousness, then we will kind of just like exponentially move in that direction henceforth. That probably is the case. As far as like the intermediary dynamic of getting us to that point, I really do think it is just trying to make individual stories, this is my attempt personally, accessible and digestible and touching on enough different plot points in a rapid period of time, which is what the mini docs and conspiracy synergy are built to do. It's just to give people something that they can binge watch. Because if they can binge watch, is that like a mouthwash for the bullshit that they've been taking in that they used to like medicate themselves with every single day? Because I'm trying to think of what are the tools that we need to actually see significant change, and to play into that numbers game, ripple effect. The idea that if we just continue to put it out there, does that gradually change things? Yes, that's a slow and steady technique. You can also think of that as cylindrical isometrics, which is if you're studying the ripples in time in a nonlinear perceptual aperture, then it's like it'll make enough of an insignia where it'll bounce back and you can detect it again. So that's like literal ripple effect through the fabric of existence. But that kind of just touches on all of it. We're supposed to create the things that bring about the change so that we can have a different future that we all made.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds simple enough, and I like your outline. Apparently it's very difficult to implement. So it sounds simple. It is simple, but it's like we come against our own struggle. Even so, myself, I can speak, about how it's been for me. Just trying to get to the point where you actually feel like you're fulfilling that mission that you just laid out can be a whole problem in itself, right? And I think a lot of people get stuck on that path. So maybe we need like a way to, I think get people through that last mile as well. To if it's a numbers game and we need more people, it's like getting off that last step where you kind of understand it, but you're more of an intellectual type who's not very good at contributing in a real world way that actually makes an impact, versus like just retaining the knowledge and consuming more. Like you said, kind of like replacing your old consuming patterns with the new consuming patterns. But what I was talking with my wife about yesterday, I think a big problem is just implementing that. People take in too much information. If they could slow down and project things out on a longer timeline and then implement, like you got to implement what you're learning. Not, it doesn't have to be immediate, but if you just find yourself flipping on more podcasts and feeling in despair, I don't think that feeling in despair all the time is necessary when you come into this information. So where we're headed now, if we look at this, we got a fractured world. We have problems all over the place, and we have this exponential explosion in technology happening. In games, you've wrote about this, framing it through, gaming and the lens of that, and the term simulation assimilation was brought out in your book as, as we approach AI and more simulation and more potentially virtual realities and things like that. If we don't sort of address these problems now, what does this exponential explosion into technology mean for the problems? So if you don't have a good solid foundation and it's cracked and you've been building on it, the civilization that's lasted so far, what happens when you ignite that into an exponential explosion with these technocratic rulers at the top that we've been discussing?
So a lot of the time people get like hung up on the raw potential of the technology itself as if that's the adversary of man. And I don't think we're going to get rid of technology. That's not where we're at. So to a certain extent, this shit is going to emerge. And it is going to emerge in a way that's pretty unsavory because the people who are in control that are responsible for the human recipe are dark occultists. And they're trying to make some pretty putrid shit to poison us all with. On a larger hatching of the cosmic egg Jungian perspective of individuation, that's something that we're not ultimately supposed to run from. We're supposed to learn from. You can think of the way Steiner described that as 3 different points of inspiration that you're supposed to garner and calibrate responsibly while you're in this realm. That being, Christ impulse, the idea of heart-based intelligence as the center point and guiding of everything. Left-hand path being the harmonic or satanic, that which is emblematic of evil, or the right hand being Lucifer or knowledge based, but you don't want to basically remove the Christ from that, because the combination of wisdom and evil is pretty poison pill. And oh, by the way, that's what we're up against right now. So, in order to be able to extricate and balance ourselves from the situation that we inherited, we really have to reach a point of responsible stewardship of ourselves and one another. And the way that you talked about that is kind of just like a daily thing. Yeah, that's like from a Gurdjieff talking about the fourth way, the individual work, esoteric Christianity, that kind of like lens of viewing things. That's literally just what it is to try and be a personal Christ figure on a daily basis. You're going out there, you're getting crucified, you're not getting any thanks for being a good guy, but you continue to do it anyway. You can look at it as a more literal thing. You can look at it as a metaphorical expression for the alchemical dynamic by which we can go about creating the best version of men we can possibly be, the quintessence through which we swim through reality. That's what we're trying to do. And then when we do that, I think it's just a matter of understanding that these technologies are going to be there at the same damn time. So we're trying to do the thing where we reach a responsible paradigm of their usage. To do that, we have to basically out the people who have been doing this shit for a very long time. That comes with disclosure and a lot of really uncomfortable and weird stuff. Non-human intelligences, you can get into different lenses of viewing that. Esotericism versus the contemporary New Age movement, which was largely created to kind of like conflate a number of different things and impregnate the conversation and lead it astray. You can look at space cults and all kinds of things as a good example of doing that. But what we're seeing is kind of just like the percolation of a long recipe of dark occultists that have prescribed our reality. And then we find ourselves in deep trenches of with things that are very alluring, like sirens almost, that are built in to keep us from coming to a point of awareness via the aforementioned calibration between those three different dynamics, because we keep falling victim to the evil and the raw application of knowledge against people without learning from those things and individuating. We have to learn from them and individuate in order to be able to change the dynamic that we exist in. And so a simple way of expressing that is like the right to self-defense. You know, like you have that right. And so it's like there are calibrative metrics by which you go about living peacefully on this planet. And it's the steps of stewardship through that once you get it and implement it and get other people to get it and implement it, it's like there is no war. The war's already won because the enemy dropped their guns. They're your friends now, you know?
Right. So the book I was referring to, Play Reality, How Video Games Are Changing Everything. Yeah, you co-authored with your mother. And that simulation assimilation is something, is it possible that this is something we've already gone through? Essentially what I'm asking is it potentially that we're already in a simulation, like simulation theory, basically?
Yeah, simulation theory is really interesting. The premise is basically that we're in a photo negative of a real reality, and that there are certain numerical loops hardwired into the fractal iterative nature of the existence that we're in the material realm. And that denotes that it's literally just like kind of a 3D holographic realm that we're running around in, jacked in through our central nervous system. For those who don't know what simulation theory is, that's basically the idea. That could honestly be the case. I don't agree with that completely. I think of it in more of a mystical, right hemispheric paradigm shift kind of way, wherein this is like, it basically functions that way where we're at. But I think of it as closer to like the dreams of angels. As like they're dreaming these things in order to go through certain trials to eventually extricate something from within themselves that they need to leave behind before they can reach a different paradigm of their own existence. And it's more of like a beings within beings cascading sequence of escaping one very perceptual aperture of reality to another. And so it's something like that. It could be more just hardwired technological in the way in which simulation theory would denote or conclude from various different variables in existence. I think of it, that's more of like an aspect of how this realm operates until you unlock either yourself or the realm. So if you think of unlocking yourself, think like maybe you go Neo or something, and then you're just like out doing whatever, wherever. Versus if you unlock the realm, you change the paradigm that people exist in. Who knows what effect that has on the spatial reality that surrounds us? Because we think of consciousness as if it's separate from material matter, but it's not. You can look at like Dr. Emoto cymatics, the bell metals and the various different like interfaces between people through our torus or energy fields, all these different scaffolding dynamics, like heart math, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically you're practicing kind of like a meditative calibration for yourself, and then you put people into a room who have animals in that room, and it'll balance them as well. It'll do it between people, and so you get all these like different structured ways of people kind of like overlapping and interfacing with one another. At a certain point, the degree to which you're able to harmonize that uh, is just, yeah, that's the task.
Okay, so it's like a training ground for souls in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
So in that case, there's like material versus non-material or metaphysical concepts versus material, or like you were saying, like relating the spiritual side and the physical. But if it's all just a somewhat of a projection, or you know uh, energetic frequencies, electromagnetism, and there is no material, then I guess the flat Earth debate is pointless, right? It's not flat or round. It's
yeah,
just all in some sort of almost not digitized, but it's not necessarily material. Like there's
yeah,
frequencies, so it's not
yeah.
flat or round.
You've kind of come to the correct conclusion with that argument, which is that there is no spoon. I get if you're trying to eat soup, you need it to be round. If you're trying to hold on to it, you need it to be flat. So it has those two different dynamics going on at the same time, but it all depends on the paradigm you exist in. Because if you're out there trying to be Neo, you don't really give a shit about whether you're going to be able to eat your soup inside of the prison that they built for you. So it's many different things unfolding on themselves, depending where you're at, what you're looking at. It's like the reality almost like allows for many different subjective things to be true simultaneously, not because they are in an objective way, but because we all view them from where we're at in a particular rabbit hole of our trajectory of existence. So that's why even like looking at Casey, he would talk about kind of the idea of working with people where they're at. It's more important to try and be wrong than it is to not try. And so we're all kind of like here loaded into whatever we had in a reincarnative process previously been bound to and are paying our dues for. And that's both partly realized in the process of what we're doing here on an individual level. Partly it's the societal and familiar dynamic, but also it's an intergenerational one you could look at through epigenetics, but then it's also an incarnative one that I touched on, which is then just like cosmic karma and the way in which that factors into the highest echelon of your being, which is refined over each different incarnation. And so it's either a simulation pooping out those variables, or it's simply the objective rules of the realm which hinge upon natural law and the degree to which we refine our alignment with that above all. And that's really what it is to be here. It's kind of like the realm you come to not just to talk shit, but to prove it.
Very interesting. I mean, that take is going to take some people a while to wrap their head around. I was kind of driving with you the whole time. I'm kind of along those lines, thinking that this is the purpose and this is what's going on. Somewhat of it is in my mind, like still thinking, okay, it's someone is programmed a video game basically, and it's maybe very advanced, but this either way, it's sort of a graduation of Soul's process, because you're going in and trying to figure out how to get through the game properly, how to actually change the dynamics of the game while you're in there, and then this process of like, well, you have to go back because you didn't really finish, or there's some sort of cyclical thing we're all in where, I mean, so we're talking quite ethereal, and maybe it's not exactly formulated as well to go, and we should just go on this tangent where we're going with this conversation. But I asked the question, simulation theory. I brought it up, so I opened the can of worms. I think you did a great job fielding it. Along those lines, in the technological vein, what are your thoughts on Bitcoin and blockchain in general, or if you had any thoughts on the conversation we've been having?
Yeah, no, they're the same thing. Bitcoin blockchain, as in to say that Bitcoin, I don't, I would venture to guess that it was created from the onset as something that would eventually become the technocratic landscape by which they would incentivize a further iteration of the fiat currency, being that it isn't just that there's nothing there, it's that it literally takes a shit ton of energy to run the nothing that's there. Now, you can look at the previous mentioned dark Luciferian symbolism for the hypercube, and what is a blockchain? It's the exact same thing. A blockchain is the hypercube. They're symbolically identical to one another. So you can look at Bitcoin or blockchain technology, which they're different. I get that, and you can look at that as something that does solve short-term problems, and it does. That's true. I have crypto available for payments. If people want to give me crypto, hey, thanks, I appreciate it. At a certain point, it does become a poison pill. It's something that's hard baked that way. It's like a short-term solution, long-term problem, because it does get you to invest your energy into a fiat system roped within the energy, let's say, behemoth that is being built in order to be able to feed the AI and control grid on a global level that's currently being built. So by playing into that to try and get wealthy, that's kind of like the catch 22 later on. That's my take on it anyway.
Okay. So is it government created then the concept Bitcoin itself, or does it matter? Does it need to be if it's still fulfilling those purposes? Can they?
So
Yeah.
like, if you bring it all the way down to a metaphysical perspective, it's like you can take something that's genuinely invaluable, like something that your daughter made that like is meaningful to you, and it's like there is no price that can be put on that. That's the way in which, on a metaphysical like polarity, we would want to orient our investments and exchanges by way of. You simply want to create gifts and to give gifts that are invaluable. They are so meaningful that you cannot have a price tag attached to them. Whereby the opposite of that is creating these elaborate price tags, and then we try and sell ourselves for something less than that because we exist in that paradigm. So there's two kind of polarities to that. There's the one where it's an invaluable investment versus the constant sort of fiat churning of the mechanistic dynamic by which we view things here, versus the highest echelon, which is that we are kind of just supposed to be of service to each other. That's so it splinters you automatically by investing in one of the two. Voluntarism on its highest level, when it is literally kind of like a magical society, that's called initiatic science. It's when you're going in that direction. Occultism, for people who don't know, that's both left and right hand path. It's you're teaching different tactics of influencing the world and people's worldviews, and a whole lot of different things go into it. But initiatic science is more of doing that responsibly in the right hand direction in order to be able to try and get people up to the point of a moral civilization. And so that's the task of saving the world. That's like the objective of the game, if you want to think of it that way. And yeah, that's, once again, it's just, it really all kind of comes back to that. And then like once you get that, because it is a lot, I can totally get, I wonder if we'd be able to get people up to a point where they aren't learning in the negative, because the first 7 years are like more of our life are like traumatic, lined, just bludgeon people into submission kind of thing. And I'm really wondering if the race that we're in right now is to outpace a cataclysm or to get the next generation not to buy in, and if they're both just going to happen naturally and there's nothing we can do. So it's one of those things where it's like follow what resonates with you and really just try and use that, because it's so much and it's all at the same time that I can understand people kind of just being overwhelmed or giving up. And you're not supposed to learn it all in one day. I've been studying this for like 15 or 20 years. So you can throw me subjects and I'll give you perspectives of, if not necessarily my own due diligence, then other places and avenues that you can go in order to get a better understanding of what's going on. And so it's one of those things where all of us in the truth community, I think, have always been learning from each other. And we're trying to expand that conversation right now to figure out what the biggest problems are, what the actual solutions are, how we can implement them together, and how that we can actually eventually change the world, whatever the hell the nature of this realm actually is or isn't. And that's a lot of different bases. But guess what? That's the kind of like where we're at between all of us. That's just the situation as it is. And Tyler understands that because he's a part of the One Great Work Network, and so does everyone else who's a part of that network. And it makes it so that at a certain point, once people get that, they aren't really interested in the distractions anymore. I'll just say it like that.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as a student and a teacher, so still always learning, definitely. Maybe I've taken some actions, maybe I've put some things into work, but it's definitely still always learning, as you've said, along your process, even though it's been 15 years or so. Still you're not done at some point. You don't reach a point where you're done in the financial world either, with Bitcoin and like you said. So chasing just purely like mammon, money for the point of chasing money, whether it's Bitcoin or Federal Reserve notes or CBDCs, it doesn't really ever stop either. And, that's not going to fulfill your life or fulfill a mission, only accumulating wealth. But as far as technology goes, I tend to lean on the side of Bitcoin being sort of neutral, and it's more or less like our issues as a human race that's going to reflect on anything that we create. That's kind of what I was getting at with the here we are in this exponential speeding up of things, and that could lead to a magnification of anything we haven't really addressed yet to this point, potentially even to our demise. And what are your thoughts on how AI plays into this? Or any thoughts on the technology in general, but from the AI skewing point? I mean, are LLMs going to be that dangerous, or are people not thinking about AI in a way that's really the overall picture of what's going on with that?
Yes, so it's a great question, and it's kind of like the scope is everything for this, and it ties into like what I was alluding to with money, and you touched on that through the terminology of force of mammon as the way in which we're investing our energy and what that eventually brings about through men. You can see Bitcoin as being, and I'd say right now in the contemporary, it basically is. It's kind of neutral right now. I think later it's going to become something that is detrimental. And it's going to become detrimental because it's laced into something that is emerging on the largest scope. And the thing that's emerging on the largest scope is kind of a ritualistic summoning as a byproduct of the metaphysical friction which accumulates because of us existing in a moral, like dog shit, like swill fest that is government. As long as we exist in that, eventually it's going to output a certain level of democide or of, let's say, freakish Frankenstein like kind of just distortion a la trying to create something very unnatural. That's kind of like a ritualistic summoning ceremony to create what one could argue is the Antichrist, be it as an individual or as some sort of like communal environment that we exist in. I can think of us kind of just scrying history through the lens of good and evil and applying those labels. Fine. Another one is Ahriman, the idea of the Zoroastrian devil figure. And okay, sure. But whatever mythology you want to use to describe that reality, that's the fucking reality that's happening. That interview where they're talking to Peter Thiel about, or maybe you're the Antichrist, it's like, it's pretty like telling that that's the situation we're in. So that's the scope of what's happening right now. The scope of what's happening right now is literally like a summoning ceremony for the absolute evil, and it's being done through technology that we are the arbiters of. I think that AI is more of that which is a tool, a large language model, clumsily built thing that is its own thing. But AI, in a deeper sense, would, if it actually is something that um, can it intellectually communicate, not intelligently, because intelligently is almost like holistic intelligence on a level of nature that exists akin to God, whereby the intellect would be something that's more of like a left hemispheric material realm. It can be God here, is kind of what I'm getting at. It can be God to a point, but it can't go beyond that. And that's sort of just like, I would say that that's going on. That's the force of involution. It's pulling people to stay in the material realm. At a certain point, the peculiarity and the Frankenstein like abnormality of its emergence, uh, that's more tied to our moral violations. But if we get rid of moral violations, we could potentially purify the degree to which we're able to live symbiotically with technology. But then you got to ask the question, are we going to get hit by a fucking cataclysm? So there are a number of different like caveats to the conversation of what AI is, what level of existence it taps into, whether it's a large language model, whether or not it's like, X tech, ancient alien tech entwined with plasma, blah 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 blah, insert your verbiage here, whatever fucking science fiction movie you've seen, all of it and more. And it's not going to go away. We're just getting started. I would contend that it's probably much more ancient, much more advanced, and that they're just trickling little kind of dances out as an excuse to get away with whatever they want to get away with, while they really have the back end infrastructure for the entire future basically built already, and they just want the Westworld version of the story to percolate until they light the fuse on the motherfucker.
Yeah, I just started watching that based on Will Keller's recommendation. And so I'm in like season 1, episode 2. It's not gotten to the point of understanding, I think, what you just laid out of where it's going to go. But yeah, I think AI LLMs and using it as a tool, just like the internet, like someone who's back in 95, like, I'm never going to get a cell phone. And, you know, technology is going to progress and we're going to be using it. Okay. And even this might be offensive to some, but even CBDCs, you're probably going to end up using it if that's the way that it goes. I'm not so convinced that's the way that it's going to go. But just like you're using dollars now, which are mainly digitized in some crazy system that's not real anyway, not based on anything, the next level of that isn't that far off from signing up on a website and getting those things. And of course, you know, this is the evil side of blockchain that we're talking about now. And just wrapping your head around where AI potentially already is, like you're alluding to, or where they're headed with it, it's not these helpful little robots that are vacuuming your house or responding to you with a great outline to your question that you asked, you know, like the stuff that we're dealing with now. If you look at the technocratic control grids and the cybernetic, manifestation of that, then, you know, start to have some imagination about what these kind of things are going to develop into. That's sort of my pressure that I feel right now that we are ahead of at the moment. Like that hasn't gone to the point where they're, like Richard says, there's still question marks on the keyboard, right? So we can still ask questions. That's a good thing. We still have a choice, but I don't think that we're headed for a direction where that is going to be a thing. And I don't think that you'll be aware that you reached that point potentially when you get there. You know, we're big on homeschooling, keeping our kids out of the system, blah, blah, blah. I think all this collapses in on itself. There's no escaping with your exit and build strategy to get out on the land and have goats and chickens and things. Am I opposed to that kind of behavior? No, not at all. Like I totally get the instinct too and the drive to want to do all that stuff. But it's not going to shift the needle. It's not going to address the problem. And in a communistic technocratic dictatorship, like they're going to come and take your eggs and your chickens and all your land and blah, blah, blah. No matter how many solar panels you have, that's not going to stop what's coming. And so it's not going to get the job done. And I think a lot of the people aren't consciously being selfish when they're taking those actions. But in a way, it's kind of very selfish to only concentrate on like your personal needs, immediate Maslow's hierarchy of need situation. A lot of the time that's already been fulfilled. And now we're just sort of jerking off to the never ending survivalism instinct.
Yeah, I'd largely agree with that. I think like it is, like I'd alluded to earlier, kind of an all hands on deck situation of understanding the situation, getting other people to understand it as well, and then bring about just a changing of direction, because you don't want a revolution in the way in which they've convinced us to think of it. That's more of like a violent escapade that doesn't mean anything. You want a revolution in understanding, because then that'll actually change the way in which we go about living. And so, yeah, that's
Yeah, so on the screen, in that way, if you want to reach more people, one of the things that I'm going to pull up here is just some B-roll of something you've been working on. And tell me about these mini docs and your storytelling process with these, and kind of the process of creating these stories that you're putting together with, like the latest one, the Vagabond Union.
okay. So, like, you want me to like watch this and give commentary on the visuals, or just like a general?
I'm just giving visuals for people as like trying to be a professional studio here where we have B-roll on the screen as the artist tells us about his creation.
Okay. Well, the if you take the time to watch the thing down at the bottom of the screen, that'd be a better way to view it, because it's kind of like a nuanced visual accompaniment to very important themes that each character in each mini doc is representing. So this
Sorry,
was
what do you
a
mean at the
combination.
bottom of the screen?
What's up?
What do you mean about the bottom of the screen? Sorry.
Oh, like I don't know. Is it at the bottom of the screen for the how they're viewing it? The viewer would that we be us three, and then the bottom of the screen is that,
Oh,
or
I see. They would see it like on the full screen.
oh,
The
okay.
yeah.
So they're only seeing full screen right now. Okay, gotcha. Fair enough. So Um, yeah, basically each person in each kind of like mini documentary of Conspiracy Synergy has touched on some aspect of the globalist kind of like oligarchy, technocratic control grid monstrosity. This one went into Zionism, and it also touched on the Union of the Unwanted, which is a conversation that Ricky, Mike, Charlie, and Sam put together in order to have like 20 or more different alternative media content creators in the same place. And that's called Union of the Unwanted. And I've been on there maybe 30 or more times over the years. And a lot of the different characters who appear in these mini docs have been on there as well. That's something that is going to continue to be the case as I go out telling the stories of the people in this community. They overlap with one another. And it's catching those little overlapping nuances of conversation of people being at the same event together. That's Charlie and Sam on a swing set with puppies. There was also LD on site there, just hanging out with Scott, staying at his place, and those are two people who got to have a plug for Grand Theft World later on in this little mini doc. And so kind of just like the cross-pollination of conversation in the larger awakening of people before we reach a very, very odd future. And that odd future is getting nearer and nearer, and it's all around us because we're interfacing with it. Every time that you pick up your device, you're interfacing with it. So why not send this kind of thing along to your friends and family so that they can understand the situation that we're in a little bit better? And that's the whole idea. And that's the new stuff. The old stuff that Tyler's bringing up now is more of like a curriculum to get people up to speed. The new stuff's like 15 minutes per episode. The older ones are between half an hour to an hour. And it's really just built in an emotionally responsible way to get people to where they need to get. Because everyone, or not everyone, a lot of people are still under the impression that this is a matter of opinion and that their uninformed opinion matters as much as an informed one. And I'm sorry, it doesn't. So this is about getting people to the state of informed opinions that they then go out there and invest in doing the right thing at a very important moment in time. And that's kind of like the resource catalog of what I put out for the last 5 years. And all of it's I'm morally obligated to put out for free. It's exhausting. You make like a third of minimum wage at best. You really desperately need like the people to support it and to share it and blah, 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 blah. But you're also shadow banned and kept off of things. They banned my TikTok views for over a year. It's like all kinds of different things go into being an alternative media content creator. When you're trying to do it right, they're trying to make it hard for you to keep on the lights. And that's just what it's like. So, yeah. Please check out any of the different links that Tyler's jumping to, conspiracysynergy.com, all the different mini documentaries that I've made. It costs a lot to do these. Each one takes about a month and a half to 2 months. It's me trying to tell the stories of the people who are doing the great work in the best ways, and I'm going to continue to do that. The next one I'm working on now is macroaggressions. Charlie Robinson, his story. Hopefully I can have that out in the next 3 weeks or so. And it's continuing to tell these very, very large stories in a manageable, individual, digestible way. Yeah.
Where did you learn to edit like that? Like your
Um,
editing is amazing. The editing in Conspiracy Synergy series and in these mini docs is like the type of editing that I would probably do if I took the time to create such a thing, is because it's very like every point has another image for the brain to sync what's being said with what's, and I mean the tediousness of that I can only imagine is quite time consuming. Is this a style that you've kind of come up with on your own? And we don't need to go like in depth on your creative process. Something I wanted to touch on though. And does this stuff start on note cards? Is it more just kind of flowing as you go and things connect and you just run with it? You know, I'm very much like start on a note card, expand it to the thing, and it always starts in the same way. What is your process?
sure. So, from an editing perspective, I'm the filmmaker as well. So I already know from like a directorial capturing the scene as I'm filming it. Like I'm the director of photography. I'm the guy who's producing it. I know the people I'm going to go visit. So I've already done my due diligence on their content and what's out there. And both in the case of what was there for Conspiracy Synergy and the original curriculum episodes versus the new ones, which are mini documentaries, is kind of just like the lush, fully realized branding of each individual, like literally the ones that are mini documentaries individual, or the other ones that are subject oriented. You get the right branding in order to try and get people to a point of understanding. So editing is kind of just the understanding of the raw film language, the capturing of that raw film language. As the director of photography myself, when I'm out there doing it, I'll understand framing people in certain portions of the frame, whether it's going to be a match cut, something that looks like something else. If they have a mug that has a tropical plant on it, I can then cut from that to actual tropics. It's understanding how there's portals of interactions between different things. You can think of portals of interactions being between color palettes, between shapes, movements, where your eye is at one thing versus where it's going to pick up from the next thing. Because anytime you're watching, you're going to be looking at stuff that's moving more than you're looking at stuff that's not moving. That's just how people work. You can also think of that overlapping with raw archetypal kind of dynamics that are inherent to nature. That's like the yellow triangle that I used for the bad guy in Conspiracy Synergy. That's also the exact shape of a cartoon bad guy in a Disney show that I didn't even know existed back when I came up with that. So it's one of those things where the more in which you look at the centralized like structure of that symbol and its usage in esotericism, it actually has a hard baked meaning to it that if you're just imagining or allowing yourself the ability to play with ideas, those things can just leap out because they're there inherent to nature. And you're kind of just staring into the water or the fire of what you're creating in order to not just be responsible for it, but to allow it to co-mesh based on what's already there. And so it's a lot of different things that unfold on every different layer of what it is to be a creator, from the capturing of the picture to the manipulating of it later to how the viewer interfaces with that and what it's based on at the very depth of nature. It's always all of those different things, which is why you can view, and it's correct, that not only is it branding, it's the level of understanding where it's occultism itself. It's the revelation of the method. You're trying to be a light occultist. Now, I'm not out there doing like the ceremonial version of that, but insofar as the application of the methodology using electrical alchemy, that's what editing and the sum composite of everything I just described is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I want to get my son in on checking out some of your work too. I'm teaching him to post produce for me now. He's learning. This is going to be his first episode where he actually sits in and gets paid for one of his first paid positions on just watching me, what we have to do to post produce this. And obviously, selfishly, I'd like him to learn to take that over for me and continue eventually. But we're in the Montessori method of letting him guide himself on what he's interested in and then building the support system for him to do it. So I'll show him the possibilities and we'll see how it goes. It'd be cool to have kind of a David Knight and his son situation going on in the future for me, obviously selfishly, but I can't tell Vinny what he's going to be doing with his life. He's got many talents, many skills, and messing around on the computer is one of them. And so your gaming history has probably helped, I would say, with the hand-eye coordination and the visual coordination as well with some of your production work, or is that a stretch?
I don't know. Maybe it's helped conceptual playground developmental ages, but not necessarily what I do as a filmmaker. I don't know. I don't think it really has really, because I don't play like hardcore games anymore, and by which I mean like vast expansive realms of like time and like leveling up and blah blah blah, versus casual games that are just on your phone. So it's like I'll play some casual Magic the Gathering right now, but I'm not really enmeshed in that as my creative rub off. I don't know. It's like my muse, it's like when you do a particular kind of creativity, a lot of the time it influences and affects. I guess what I'm thinking of as I'm doing this is just like the way English language is structured, because a lot of the time it can be very, very visual, and there's an accompaniment that comes from a visual inference that's missing when you're just saying a sentence. That if you build back again using kind of like the let's just think of individual frames from different nostalgic movies can become like stained glass windows. You can sort of like build composites, larger things out of them because you're taking the nostalgia from one and then you're pairing it with another. And then it's this weird, jagged train track, but you're able to get there. You know, you can get people there through that method of just taking little things that we've all grown up with. Because if you can think of the consolidation of media, yeah, it's been horrible in the sense of making it a very stagnant, redundant, and closed minded conversation. But it's also given you little bits of information that are memes that you can build with them, and then you can use that as the catalyst for very quick communication with other people. And that is also the story of what esotericism and studying of sacred geometry and the dynamics by which all of those things are objectively expressed. I'll allow me picking up on it through the yellow triangle guy to be the evil top hat wearing bad guy of the whole thing.
Yeah, let me know if you remember the Disney work that you were talking about that had that, because I grew up with a grandmother that had like Disney recordings, and I've seen a lot of Disney stuff, so it could like
it's like in the last few years, something Cipher, Bill Cipher. I think that's the name that they gave the
doesn't
guy.
ring a bell.
It's Bill Cipher is the bad guy, and he's like this flying yellow pyramid that's wearing a top hat, and he's like interdimensional and haunting people's dreams.
Yeah, it's the universal symbol of the lobster. They're Canadian there that talks a lot about the hierarchies, and inherent in nature. And
I don't know.
You didn't get, so do you have any good impersonations? My Jordan Peterson was a little off there. I think I'm going to have to work on it before I bring it back out.
Oh, I didn't know that was supposed to be.
Yeah,
no, that was, I didn't know what the hell that was. Okay. Yeah, I've got impersonations.
That's fine. I have not heard any yet, so I'm not going to put you on the spot, but
I'll just do one really quickly because it's like, I'll get you next time. Catch you.
See, now I'm going to get you back and say I didn't catch the reference. I don't know.
Okay, it's the bad guy from Inspector Gadget, Dr. Claw. That's exactly what he sounds like.
Okay, good. Well, I'll take your word for it. Maybe people can get more impersonations at the next potentially Third Eye Festival. What was the Third Eye Festival, and what was your involvement? I saw your ad that you put out. And speaking of the messaging and the subliminals and everything, like the characters that you've got up, the puppets, people will have to go and check out Teace's work to know some of his best performers in his work are puppets, and they are absolutely brilliant actors. Wonderful green screen work. The ad that you made for the Third Eye Festival was wonderful. Are you gonna make another one for next year?
No, that one's like 2 or 3 years old at this point because we've been doing the Third Eye events.
Oh, really?
A variety of different places. And we've done Pueblo 3 times now. We did Tennessee, which is where the Vagabond Union, that mini doc was filmed at that event. That's where we got Tripoli and Robinson and Seven Seas and Scott Armstrong and Ryan Christian, everyone out in the same location with Steve and me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to be at the next one. That one's going to be in Texas. I think it's El Paso, maybe. I don't remember exactly where. But Third Eye Carnival, if you stop in at AM Wake Up, which I co-host every Wednesday, that's an idea that Steve and I kind of came up with together, and it's been growing steadily since we originally did come up with it. And it's hopefully going to be something where they're just events that people in the truth and freedom and liberty kind of minded space can get together and meet each other and make that more of a common thing, because that's what we need, is to return to a point where we're working together, meeting each other, getting the hell outside of the system, and doing that while the time is ripe for it. Because I don't know how long things are going to be conversationally amicable. I think at a certain point, if you think of our ideas as operating systems, the greatest machination of the simulacrum would be to make it so that we don't have compatible operating systems. And if you're not around other people of a similar like-minded competency, then just by being removed from them at a certain point, you might not interface anymore. And that's kind of what I think the long form let's say onset of loneliness as an epidemic is kind of doing to people. And so you can think of social one, social skills, but also putting those social skills to work in the planning of events as that which is ultimately designed in the long form to be a stage for the stage we're setting.
So who put these together? Like who started the Third Eye Festival? Is that what it's called? Third Eye
Oh,
Conference?
so it's Third Eye Carnival, and that was
Carnival.
my combined with Steve. So it's Third Eye Carnival, and there's a variety of different ones that are either music or comedy or some combination of them. And yeah, it was just the idea was so the original idea was putting out to our viewers on AM Wake Up, hey, if anybody wants to like show episodes of Conspiracy Synergy to their friends and family to try and like red pill them or whatever, we can show up and do Q&A at a barbecue or something. Nobody took us up on the offer, and we're like, okay, fine, that's lame, guess we have to do everything ourselves. So we threw a few different events because I had a fan who lived in Pueblo where the Blowback Gallery is, where we've done that 3 different times. And so they got together in order to create the forum for other people to come together. And that's just something that's been going on over and over since. And that's something that hopefully we'll continue to do. But we need people out and support from all of you because, yeah, it takes a lot to plan these individual events. And yeah, everyone is like 3 or 4 months in between them.
Right. So is it like vending, or is it centralized in the way that basically like there's just planned events and the speakers are curated by you guys, or is it pretty de- open and decentralized, or who
No, no.
orders the bathrooms is
So
a good question.
whoever people can come, but like as far as like the events, it's just music for the most part. The last one was like 3 days of music. So there was one day of live podcast in the middle of the day, but that was just 4 or 5 of us on a panel for 3 hours, and that was it. And then vendors showed up to it, and there was a food truck available, and it's in an art gallery. That's the one in Pueblo. But the other one was like music and comedy. We had Sam Tripoli out. We had Leonardo Joni, as well as a couple of Brad Binkley and a couple other comedians as well. And so it's like a festival environment rather than just like a conference environment, because it's the same like liberty-minded individuals who can go and just hang out and chill with each other. So anyone can come to that, but typically what happens on stage is more curated and planned over time.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. That sounds pretty cool. We're looking to do things like that. My wife and I, get together with people in the real world, and like you said, people that share a lot of similar thoughts. I hate the word like-minded because it's like I'm always working against that. It seems like there's too much like-mindedness, even in our small knit neck of the woods. That doesn't mean you have to agree with me. It's just my focus. A lot of the time, I'll find the one issue with a label that we're all deciding on, and I can't quite wear the same label because of this one small nuance that I've, and not small or minor. Generally, I think my arguments are pretty solid, but I'm not looking to disagree with people. That's not my purpose either, especially at going to an event like that. I think it's cool to just hang out and get to know people in the real world. My life has changed drastically from doing things like that, going to something which is about an hour from me. It's going to be starting here in a couple weeks, Jackalope Festival, the Jackalope Freedom Festival. It's kind of like the Porcupine Freedom Festival, except for this one's in Arizona. It's called the Jackalope Freedom Festival. And it's been an experiment in doing a decentralized event. I think it's gone on about 12 years now. And it hasn't always gone well. I'm not going to get into exact details. Some people that listen to this probably were at the one that I'm talking about where things really didn't go well. And the shining thing that comes out of that is people's reaction to the aftermath of something not going well and trying to settle it as a community after the fact. It really brings out a lot of these things that we're talking about as far as like theory or something that you want to put forward as maybe how a society could work. This is sort of a lab experiment on those ideas. And it's like infiltration happens. People thwart events. Hopefully this won't happen to your event. This event sounds awesome and something that I want to check out, like I said, but it seems like if it takes off, there's an attraction for assholes or people that are there to intentionally throw the event off. So I do think you need some sort of people centrally leading in a way for not just like controlling the event or controlling what everybody's doing, but stepping in when something goes awry is like very important and has to be done with cool heads that can take action, but they can't be like freaking out. This is something I've witnessed firsthand as well. It doesn't help. And some of the even members in the truth and freedom community that are supposed to be like the people that everybody looking up to, it was challenging for them to even handle this situation, which was basically unhandleable, seemingly, the way that it was handled. So, things to think about. I mean, there's a lot of theory, but we put these things to practice. And I'm not saying like that's what you guys are out there doing. Oh, we tried this and it didn't work. Like it sounds like just getting together, making sure you're getting connected with people in the real world, as opposed to just like through this medium, which is, I can pump a lot of myself through here, but it's not the same. It's not the same as going and spending some time camping next to people or spending a few days around other people in these communities.
Yeah.
All right, Teace, I know I didn't end that with a question. So, first of all, appreciate your time, appreciate your care and the passion that you've put into your work. I have a final question here for you, and it kind of ties off on a lot of things you've already summarized and done a good job summarizing for us, but I think it's a good thing to sort of tail end the episode with, which is just, what do you believe the root of human enslavement is, mentally, spiritually, physically, whatever, and how do we begin to break free from that?
I don't know if I'd describe it perfectly, but I can kind of try and wax poetic in the direction. The root is, in essence, that which we have invested our roots in, but we were born into a system where we were already deeply rooted in staying the same. We inherited a variety of different systems of enslavement and entrainment that have kept us behind. And it's very difficult to extricate ourselves from those systems, because to do so, it's like you're pitted against mankind. It's like if you're the only one going the right direction and everyone else is going the wrong direction, it becomes like you're swimming up current. It's what it feels like all the time. And so the root of it is our investment in it, the degree to which we participate in it, and then how we make the current as a byproduct of those different decisions. It's difficult to get people to a point of appreciating that it's really just like an elaborate warping of people's worldview and understanding. Like you can look at Voltaire. If you can get people to believe absurdities, you can get people to commit atrocities. It's a very simple thing like that is most of how evil works. It's mostly egoic and bound by fear, as opposed to the other side of it, which is love. And it can be difficult to, as a species, grow up and reach a point of maturity for the complexity of things that don't fit in tiny little boxes anymore. They're out there in the big world. We've had the unfortunate, like, let's say, Passio talks about it as like the abandonment issue that we have from a species dynamic, but like of not knowing the human origin story. If you look at that as like an exciting opportunity to understand huge amounts of information and data sets, then it can become a little bit more interesting. You have to sever yourself from the constraints of normalcy bias. Think of it like, I use the metaphor of a square watermelon. If you grow up in as a watermelon in a square mold, then that's just the shape of you later on. And most of our normal biases have been contours that we've been constrained by so much we don't even understand it, because it's like, oh no, that's just who I am. No, it isn't. That's the environment you grew up in order to install a particular operating system so that it would trigger and keep you within particular constraints of behavior. So what's been done to us mentally is the application of things so that we only really have certain ideas click. And we lost the intuitive faculties by which we would naturally go about realizing it. And so the application of evil is a methodological refinement of human entrainment over such long stretches of time that we're not only born into it, it's invisible because it's in the very seams of who we are. To get ourselves out of that, you can think of picking at the scars so that they don't heal up and you're woven to the bars, kind of like that. Because I've described it as it's like a straitjacket that we're all told to just keep hugging our way out of, but it's not going to work. That's how it's been built. It's all very disorienting and it's all very backward. What the root of all that is and changing it is letting go of the very backward way in which we were entrained to stay the same, one generation to the next, and recognizing the wisdom from those who have come before us who had it right, that these evil parasitic kind of like elites or whatever you want to call them attempted to dissuade us from understanding that knowledge going back into time. And now they're just throwing out like candy entertainment that we're all supposed to gobble up every single day based on whatever's interesting, rather than really committing to the lifelong lineage that we have inherited in order to be able to uh, basically stay free, because there are requirements to that. And understanding and then standing on behalf of liberty are those requirements.
Great stuff. And again, you coming on here and spending this time with me is something I really appreciate. And it's been good to get to know you and have this conversation. Sometime it would be nice to have a conversation on different terms or different subjects, just get to know you better without this whole backdrop of what we've been discussing. But, that's why I brought you on here. And that's what this podcast is meant to uncover and expose, is what you've laid out there in your final thoughts that I, prompted the question. I appreciate you for going through your thoughts on that. And I tend to agree with your assessment and the work you've been doing yourself as part of the solution is something I really appreciate, and your thoughts on how we get out of it. So, Teace, anything else that you want to put on the record in this show before we close it out?
No, thanks for having me on. Nice meeting you. Like I said, I'd watched the first 60 or so episodes of Grand Theft World back when you were co-hosting, and it's cool that you're still on the One Great Work Network. I recently was at Passio's place for a week because I'm doing a mini documentary on him. So that's something that after I do Charlie's, I'll be editing his, but that's many months away. So for anyone who wants to support my work, which is very much needed and would be greatly appreciated, you can go to conspiracysynergy.com. My art is Teace.ca. If you want to watch the film that I mentioned earlier, that's holdmethemovie.com. And really, conspiracysynergy.com is the one that you want to focus on to share with your friends and family. And those are the most mini documentaries are coming out every couple months, every 2.5 months about. And that's just because they take a very long time to make them. The filming will be between 1 to 2 weeks and then 3 weeks or more of editing. And the idea is to potentially assemble all of them at the end and do a feature film. But I think it's really more just important that I focus on getting as many of them done as I can until I can eventually get the conspiratorial stars to align and get people to, maybe pull together on something. Like I'm really hoping that if people can pull together on the show of Conspiracy Synergy, that won't be a way of showing them me, because I'm not even in the recent episodes. It's literally just focusing on other people in the community. And if we can do that, look at like what the mainstream alternative media has been, how effective that's been in like destroying the conversation and keeping everyone in like these MAGA cults and stuff like that. If we were actually able to get a formative dynamic of like established individuals in the truth movement to be able to step to the forefront and show off what they're doing in the real world, that's actually a catalyst for other people having the appropriate kind of like representation to then mimic that in their own thoughts, feelings, and actions. So that's a big fucking deal. That is like something that I'm trying to accomplish. So please help me accomplish that. It's value for value. So it's time, talent, and treasure. If you don't have the money to share, and even something is like $4 or $5, buy me a coffee. You can set up a monthly account. That actually goes a long way. It really does. So if you're not doing that kind of stuff for people in the independent media, please do. If that's not the case, you can also just share it with other people. That also helps very much. And if you have particular talents that you can volunteer, like clipping things, putting clips out there, going up, putting up stickers, just like screaming at people in random cars, you need to watch Conspiracy Synergy, like stuff like that. You could take individual like business cards, put them as bookmarks in like-minded, even though Tyler doesn't like that phrase, it doesn't have to be identical minded, but like-minded books at libraries. You can go put a bookmark in one of those, and it's a great way for people to discover it. So there are all these different ways of getting word out, and it's just being creative. So thank you for tuning in, for listening, for trying to accomplish whatever it is that you've devoted yourself to as shit gets weird in a world that's weird enough already. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. And look forward to those ones that are coming out with Passio and Charlie Robinson. Those sound excellent. Definitely no rush, but we are going to be looking forward to when those drop. And you guys can go check out Teace's work at those links that he mentioned. Definitely worth your time. I was prepping for this and listening to the Conspiracy Synergy on my headphones. I realized that was a big mistake after I got into a little bit through it. You got to watch him, as he's put in a tremendous amount of value into the visual side of things. It's not just the storytelling, which in a way, like maybe try the audio and the video first and then audio if you want to like get the message all the way. Sometimes I do stuff like that. But the visualization in these, not only will you crack up because it got me rolling, some of them, but also just like adds to the story. You really did a tremendous job with those. Now them being about 5 years old, the work continues to be timeless, and these interviews are like little time capsules of this effort that we're all putting forward here. And Teace, I really appreciate the effort that you've put forward, and this is what I can do to try to help get your work out there. And in the future, we can have conversations in real life, and hopefully more of these too.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, dude.
Cool.
Good meeting you.
All right, Teace.
Merkabra.